Checker. Marlene said she had a few minutes and grabbed her towel and sat down, and Pete guessed she didn't have to be anywhere even in a few minutes if she was floating around in a pool noontime on a Monday. Pete said, "Boy, this has been some day already," and opened up a section of the LA Times that was laying there. "If you're asking me to react to something," Marlene said, "would you mind completing a thought?" "I don't mind at all. In fact, I'd suggest filling you in over dinner, except it's a little early, but we can make it work." Marlene said, "Something tells me you've made that parlay before to various people." "Oh, most definitely," Pete said. "That's one of my signature moves. Create unfinished business, which is so intriguing that the person can't resist joining me." "Pretty sleazy," she said. "Or," he said, "how's about let's cut out the bullshit and go have a drink?" Marlene opened up a section of the newspaper now, too. "You're right," Pete said. "What I'll do in that case, I'll pick up some ribs. We'll have a little barbecue. Around 5, okay?" She thought about it and said, "We're allowed to barbecue here?" "I've never tried it, no. How would you work it? Throw out some lava rocks or something on the cement?" "Now you're playing with me," she said. "But I suppose I can buy you dinner if you like pizza. I have a coupon." "Sheesh," Pete said. "All the moves I save up trying to use on individuals, that's a first." "You don't like the tables being turned?" "Not at all. I need to be in control. I know, it's a weakness." "Not always," she said. In that case, Pete had a small project he figured he could squeeze in, but it screwed him up. Not the project itself, but getting there, since these two drivers got into it on one of the residential cross streets and were out of their cars blocking traffic. And Pete tried to be a peacemaker, but it didn't play out great. Marlene said, "Golly, unless you took a dip in the ocean or got tangled up in a hose, you're sweating pretty profusely." "Well, I have a thing about being late," he said. "I get ticked off at people when they keep me waiting. Sometimes drop them. So the pressure's on me. I have to keep producing." Marlene looked at her watch and didn't say anything. They were back by the pool, and she was reading a book, using another chair as a footrest. Her hair was pinned up, and she had on a long cotton dress. There were subtle suggestions of the curvaceousness Pete had admired earlier, but everything tasteful. "I'm going to jump past that for a second, the timing part," he said. "You have more freckles than you did midday. It must be the light." Marlene ignored it and said, "Were you serious when you said you've dropped people for being tardy?" "Consistently tardy, yeah. There comes a point." "I generally run late," she said. "You were in luck tonight since I already live here." "Well, you'll probably get dropped pretty soon then," Pete said. "In that case," she said, "shall we even bother?" "It depends how hungry you are." Not a good line, honestly. "Well, I was telling someone recently, I can't remember the circumstance, but that my mom would lecture me, make sure you marry someone who can get ready fast and eats a lot." She said, "Interesting. So you're advancing the marriage card. Why not?" "Nah," Pete said, "you're only halfway there. If you have a good appetite, that is. Otherwise, you're zero of the way there." Marlene reacted funny for the first time, like she doesn't mind playing along some, but this is ridiculous. Pete said, "You have to forgive me. I'm a little punch drunk, and I can blurt stuff out, which comes from being preoccupied, which I am more of lately." Marlene said, "Well, it's not the worst thing to have a lot on your plate, though fiction can help." Holding up her book, something by Robin Cook, a medical thriller. "You mean it distorts your real world? A good story?" "Possibly, or removes you from it entirely. I gave in and bought myself a Kindle. It's wonderful." I can't read on those things, Pete said. Oh, there's an adjustment, but then you're off and running. Now I have a Kindle Unlimited membership, so I'm a full-fledged devotee. The problem, Pete said, I look around at those books on Amazon that I assume you're talking about, and they have this look inside feature where you can read the first 10%. Exactly. And when I try that, most of them I cringe. Well, you're a tough critic, she said. Maybe that's part of your problem. Geez, you know me, 3 hours and you're already diagnosing a problem. I am pretty hungry, she said. Marlene's coupon was for the pizza place in Hermosa that Pete liked, and he hadn't been there in a while. Hole in a wall a block from the beach. The owner was friendly, liked to talk. Tonight he came by the table pretty quick, but it was busy and he didn't linger. Pete said, that guy, he told me his life story. I could barely eat, though I didn't mind. It was entertaining. I like when people wear their emotions on their sleeve, Marlene said. That's kind of a strange comment, Pete said. Really? I was merely following up what you just said. I don't know, you shifted it a little. You kind of killed any momentum I had going. Marlene took a swig of her beer and didn't say anything, and Pete was thinking that's good. Hopefully she's not too big a boozer, since beer over wine is a decent sign. She said, you're kind of a whack job. First I thought you were the rugged type, like the Marlboro Man, but you're needy. But see, you're not particularly bent out of shape about it. What about your friends? You mean, do any of them share your view? Marlene said to take it how he wanted, but she had to use the ladies' room. Pete decided he liked this place all around. It was cozy, the prices were fair, plus with the coupon, there were no complications, just second entree free. Often you run across these things other places where there's fine print. He noticed now the paper placemat. That was full of coupons too, and you might as well take a look. No more food though. These were all outside businesses, and not the fancy ones around here, but the ones that looked like they needed a little help. Several of them up on Sepulveda. A muffler place, a tax preparer, nail salon, surf shop, and a couple further down on Artesia toward the Redondo Beach Mall, a music store, and a Verizon phone place. Then there was one more, for a service way over in Santa Monica. Skilled family counselor, 10 years experience, crisis intervention, caring and compassionate, traditional solo practice, relationships, diversity. Free 45-minute evaluation. Pete figured since his eye had wandered there anyway, what would it hurt to save the darn thing? So he moved his calzone off the placemat and casually made a couple creases and tore off the small counseling service item and stuck it in his pocket, and Marlene came back and they finished up, seeing things a little more eye to eye, Pete was thinking, the second half of the meal. And he debated, suggesting going somewhere else, since it was still early, when the waiter took away the dishes and Marlene asked what he'd torn off. Pete hesitated, and she put two and two together and checked her own placemat against the missing part of his, and she looked at him. Pete said, "What, you think I'm going too far?" "I really don't know enough to comment," she said, "but it is sweet of you to consider." And this was real weird. Her point being, apparently, Pete taking her seriously when she called him a nutcase and deciding to address it. "Let me ask you this," he said. "No, forget that. Wrong line of questioning. Do you like bars?" "I can," she said. "I have to get up early, though." So far, neither one had poked into the other's business, the how they made a living part, and that was fine. Pete said, "So let's head to my place for a while. The good thing, you can even wear your robe and slippers, since you have a built-in escape if you're worried I'm not going to behave myself." "Are you?" "Of course." Which was accurate. He wasn't planning to make any moves. That wasn't the thought process, at least he didn't think. So they went back, and Marlene didn't stop in her apartment and change to the robe and slippers, but she made herself comfortable on the couch, and Pete put on coffee and asked if she wanted to play cards, or how about a board game. She said she felt like some old-fashioned TV, and Pete handed her the changer, no idea what typical TV was anymore. The lines blurred between the networks and the hundreds of spin-off channels. There was one show he heard about that he was interested in. No idea when it was on, but he ran it by Marlene. The premise was a guy puts on a disguise one day and robs a bowling alley. He only clears a couple $100, and he never gets caught, but the psychological weight is heavy duty, and he pays the price on some level every day. Marlene nodded and said she'd never heard of it and put on the Rachel Maddow show. You're kidding, Pete said. I like to stay informed, if you don't mind. Fine, except you wanted old-fashioned television, I thought. She wasn't listening. A guest was talking about a looming government shutdown if Washington didn't get its act together pronto. Meanwhile, Pete said, Have you ever thought about living in Florida? Huh? Marlene said. Should be a basic question. Not seeing the confusion. Have you ever been to Florida? She said. Why would you put yourself in those extreme conditions? I'm thinking if you were going to reinvent yourself somewhere, it might be an option. No, obviously. I spent a winter there once, she said. That was in Gainesville. By the time the heat and humidity and bugs roll around, you're thrilled you vacated. Wait a second, Gainesville, that's barely real Florida. You're in more like Georgia there. Real Florida's worse. What's so bad about here? Pete had to admit there was nothing bad about it. In many ways, Manhattan Beach was the best place he'd ever lived. That's another angle I'm exploring, he said. You want to go in and buy a house together? How would that be? A what? The thing people live in, with the driveway and roof. We need about 8 more people and we can pull it off. I'm going to say this gently, she said, but are you on some medication? Pete was trying to distract her from the dumb political talk show and obviously falling flat. I'm not, he said, but I'll break the ice and ask you, what's your story? I'm a school teacher, she said, K through 8. Oh, except not at the moment. Or wait a second, is school out for Christmas vacation then? I believe they get out on Wednesday. But you were right, I'm looking for a job. Geez, well, how's that going? It's a process, it's the best I can say. So just like that, boom, you're here, Pete said? I mean, where'd you teach before? Appleton, Wisconsin. Holy smokes, big change. I felt I needed one, yes. There we go, now we're getting to it. The standard scenario, a relationship gone sour and someone needs a fresh start. He said, You don't seem that difficult to be around. The guy had bad judgment then? Went gay on you? What? It's a she, Marlene said, and if you don't mind, we can dispense with the comedy, please. It's still delicate. Ah. Well, see? This is what I was thinking earlier. Going back to the pizzeria. Why it's better to not ask too many questions. A bit late now, she said, and it was clear she was still sensitive, and her voice was quieter. That's my fault all the way then, Pete said. I should have trusted my instincts, but seeing how the damage is done, just to clarify, you're a lesbian then? I'm not sure, Marlene said, and there was a knock on the door, and geez, some guy had the wrong apartment, but it kind of broke the mood. So Pete asked how her job search was going. It sucks, honestly, she said. Okay, that's no problem, he said. You just need to think outside the box. I'm listening. Well, the key, you find out what the doofuses are doing and do the opposite. Interesting. And the doofuses being the other teacher applicants? Your competitors, yeah. Who do you think? I was almost going to bring up an old story where the guy deals with his competitors. I don't want to bore you. It won't, she said. How did your friend address it? Not my friend, some guy in a book. Made up. And the guy's a sociopathic case. But my point is, there's some logic to the principle. Which is what? Okay. There's a job available, very specific. A dying industry, paper mills. There's only a handful of people qualified for the particular position. So first, the guy puts an ad in the industry newsletter. The ad is for a similar job but a fake one. He takes out a P.O. box and requires the applicants' resumes to be mailed there. Marlene said, so he's going to figure out how many others are going to apply for the real job. That, plus get their addresses. Once he obtains all the information, he kills them off one by one. It was doable because, as I said, it was so specialized, you only had like a half dozen qualified applicants. My God, you can't be serious. What'd I just say? This didn't really happen. This is a story. I know, but just the concept. In his demented brain, what's wrong with the concept? He's the last man standing, so he's the only one who applies for the job. Does he get it then? Pretty sure he does, yeah, but then something happens that throws in a monkey wrench, I think. That's irrelevant, though. You're missing the big picture, asking a question like that. Well, excuse me then, she said. So the trick is how that applies to you, getting hired by the LA Unified School District. Is that what they call it? In Los Angeles proper, yes. At this point, I'll settle for any number of districts. Well, like I said, that's just an example of going outside the box. Maybe someone else will have a 360-degree different recommendation. I like yours, actually, she said. Oh, so I'm not the whack job as much now. If I did the same thing, hypothetically, faked a job listing, and collected resumes, how would I discourage the other applicants without killing them? Pete said, that'd be tougher, admittedly. But hey,